Welcome to the Bladtcast. Very excited today to be diving into yet another summer blockbuster, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I am Christian Blatt, as always. Returning to the show, Zach Shaffer from $2 Late Fee. Zach, thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here to talk about one of my favorite franchises of all time.
Yeah, it's one of several favorite franchises that include Harrison Ford.
Yeah, no doubt.
Let's not forget the Jack Ryan franchise.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, Star Wars, the American Graffiti franchise, and I guess Regarding Henry didn't lend itself to becoming a franchise. But
why didn't they ever make a sequel to Witness? Come on.
I'm still waiting. Also with us, the one and only Mr. Phil Svitek, who we were reminiscing before we started how many years I've known Phil. It's before my daughter was born, and she'll turn 6 this year, so it goes back. But Phil, thank you. And your podcast, is it called A Phil Svitek Podcast? I think that's the branding. Okay, I wanted to, because it's not the.
It's not the. It's a play on Martin Scorsese film or whatever. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, it's like we both know Sam Roberts a little bit from SiriusXM. He had Sam Roberts' show, but it wasn't apostrophe S. But it's confusing because his last name had an S. So look, there's a lot of fun with language, but that is not why we're here today. We're here to talk about Indiana Jones 5, and it's interesting to think back. I guess by the turn of the century, I think most of us just figured, all right, we've got those 3 Indiana Jones films, then we're just not going to get more, and I didn't have any reason to think we were going to get them. And we got one in, I think it was 2008. We got Crystal Skull. And I remember having fun in the theater while I watched it. But Crystal Skull was one of those movies that as it sat inside my crystal skull, I was like, oh, that was kind of stupid. I had fun with it for the most part, though. And, that term nuke the fridge really came out of it. I'm like, I actually thought that was kind of cool. Yeah. So I'm not going to go so far as to say I'm an apologist for Crystal Skull. I just remember sitting in the theater and not hating it. However, I've never rewatched it. So, so there might be that. But let's put our cards on the table, and I'll ask you first, Zach. Where were you at coming into this movie in terms of the 4 previous Indiana Jones movies?
It's very interesting. My son turned 9 this year, and as your kids get older, they start becoming a little less sensitive to shocking scenes in movies. And my son loves the Marvel universe, and we started toe dipping into Raiders way back when, maybe when he was 6 or 7, and it was a little too intense at the time. About a year ago, we watched Raiders. We didn't watch Temple, but then we watched Last Crusade. And as a kid's movie, I wouldn't call Last Crusade a kid's movie. I feel like it's a teen and adult movie, subject matter wise, especially when the father and son are both dating, quote unquote, dating the same woman. And so we found that one to be a little slow. He was excited to see the new one, and I took him to the theater to see it. And prior to it, I said we should watch the 4th one just to catch up.
Yeah, sure.
We kind of loved it. From a kid's perspective, we kind of loved it. And I'm going to say, it's got flaws, as I kind of think the 3rd one does too. And then we never watched the 2nd one. We watched Temple, and I think Temple might be my favorite Indiana Jones movie of all time, at least in name. Maybe
so
starting
you're saying
with
Temple
Raiders.
of Doom is your favorite.
I think Temple of Doom is my favorite. And then we watched the new one in the theater. And my God, we were captivated for the entire time. He didn't once feel bored or lost. He was totally in it. I was too. We both loved it, and I can't wait to watch it again.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the perspective of watching a film with a child is you don't know. And this goes back like 2 years. My son was really interested in the Jungle Cruise movie. And anybody who saw it, it's not great. That's not the point, though. Yeah. He was excited because he's interested in traveling. And this was like, we were still right in the middle of the pandemic, really. And, he discovered maps in the world, and he wanted to see everything. And we're like, great, you can't leave Burbank. In fact, you kind of like staying in like a 3-block radius for about a year. So anyway, he loved the idea of that. And then seeing that movie, I'm like, all right, well, he was able to handle like face melting that it's not as intense as Raiders, but the VFX are more convincing.
Yeah.
So that really opened it up to like, all right, you told me you're too scared for Star Wars. Well, you're seeing Star Wars now. You know what I mean?
Right.
So and I asked him if he wanted to see this Indiana Jones movie because he's interested in it. But it's kind of like the way that I look at things even now. He's like, he wants to see the other ones first.
Yeah.
So we're going to see Raiders at some point, and I was gonna skip Temple of Doom because you're talking about Last Crusade being a PG, like basically being a 13-year-old movie. Yeah. But Temple of Doom was like one of the first two actually PG-13 rated movies. I think Dune and Temple of Doom were the first two. It's like they almost invented the rating for those two movies. I know that's not actually the case, but it felt like it. And I am not here to slam Temple of Doom, but it was never my favorite. It was always the distant third when there were only three.
What's interesting, really, really quickly, and I think Red Dawn was a part of that PG-13 phase as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Temple of Doom.
Me trying to drop facts on the guy who does the 80s podcast.
I'm just gotta call it out. I will say we watched Temple of Doom. It's the first time I've seen Temple of Doom in 20 years. And I think having Short Round as a kid and protagonists in there to sidekick to help out Indy was really appealing to my son.
I can see that.
It wasn't as terrifying as I expected it would be. It was actually tamer than I thought that I remembered it to be. So based on stuff that comes out now, definitely tamer than Endgame or any Avengers type film. So I think
it's a great point. And let me ask Phil. Phil, at what point, how old were you when you saw someone reach into someone's chest, pull their heart out in Temple of Doom? So
that's a good question. I mean, I grew up more so on Last Crusade, and then kind of revisit. Raiders was next, and then Temple of Doom. I think that was like a lot later. And for me, like honestly, like Crystal Skull was the first Indiana Jones in a theater, and they actually filmed around New Haven at Yale University for, the motorcycle chase stuff. And, so like at the time, like I was, exiting high school, going to college. And so I was excited of like, oh, wow, like this, there was a connection there for me of like, oh, the film industry is exciting. Not only that, but it's also like in my own backyard. So there's like cool stuff happening. So I was really excited to see it. And Christian, you and I share a love of South Park. It really did feel like that, like South Park episode where they made a whole parody where essentially Spielberg and Lucas are essentially raping Harrison Ford. Like that's what.
Oh my gosh!
Like. It's true. Yeah. You can get away with a lot when you do animation. And,
true.
Wow. And Trey and Matt have some very harsh opinions on the prequel trilogy that I don't necessarily agree with, but I can certainly find the humor in it. And so you felt like that's what they did to
with
the
Crystal
legacy
Skull.
of Indiana Jones. With Crystal Skull. Yeah. That was what they did. Let's just say to the legacy of the character. Harrison Ford was just there for a check.
Yeah. I mean, I did revisit Crystal Skull just in anticipation of this, and is as bad as I remember it? No, but it's definitely not like great for me,
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that, and I think it's interesting, just how much that film features Shia LaBeouf, and sometimes you see a movie and it's so much from the era it was made in, even if it's not set in that time. Like when you think of the cast of Toy Story when it started, it's like, oh yeah, these are all some of like the biggest names in the early 90s. I'm not talking about Tom Hanks, but like Tim Allen, and you go through the list and you're like, oh yeah. And great gig for all of them that they've continued to be able to do those voices. And that was Shia LaBeouf's moment in time where it was like, well, he's the obvious choice for this. And, I think the results were mixed. And I wonder if everybody walked away from Crystal Skull feeling like, well, we really stuck the landing. We really did this. If we would have ever gotten another one, would they have spun off the character of Mutt, in his own movie? I don't know. Maybe that was a plan somewhere. But I think everybody felt like, let's take another crack at giving a proper farewell to Henry Jones, Indiana Jones. And so we'll dive into the movie itself, but comment from the chat, Dominicus Saxon, he's ranking the movies. which is something that I said that I would do during this show. So he goes, Last Crusade, Raiders, Temple of Doom, Dial of Destiny, and then Crystal Skull. But 2 and 5 are about tied. Well, my hot take is, and I'm not discounting Temple of Doom entirely, but I think Raiders for me is the best. A lot of times it's hard to say that the first in the series isn't the best. It's certainly the case sometimes. Mission Impossible would be a good example of that. But I like Raiders, Last Crusade, and I actually put the new one. It's like I flipped it. It's like really close with Temple of Doom, and just again, Crystal Skull's a distant one. I'm not going to make you guys rank. If you're inclined to, you're welcome to. But it's a game that we play sometimes, and I'll let people in on a little secret. When I do my rankings of the Star Wars movies, I always put The Last Jedi so low because I want to make people mad. I don't actually think it's worse than the Christmas special and the 2 Ewok TV movies, but it sure is funny to have people react to it when I post it on Twitter. Anyway,
well, I will interject really quickly and just say that I love my motto is dig what you dig. If you like it, totally. That's all that matters. And I think you guys share the same mentality. And there are some people out there that absolutely love Crystal Skull, and that's great. My son is included in that. Do I feel it's that great? No, but it's fun, and I get his perspective. I love Temple of Doom. I think I love Temple of Doom more now simply because of Short Round, and it has nothing to do with the actors where they are currently. It's simply like, man, it was so fun to see a kid in that kicking butt,
Yeah.
And so, and maybe being a parent, I have a skewed opinion. You too, Christian. I think it might be the same deal. You see it through a kid's eyes, it's one way. But then as a personal perspective, when I look at Raiders and I go, man, but Raiders I have so much fondness for it, And Last Crusade, I just don't feel the same love of Last Crusade that a lot of other people do. But that's totally cool. If that's at the top of your list, go for it. Dial of Destiny, I would put smack dab in the middle. I would put it above 3. But that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, but it's the same thing. I'm like, I like it more than Temple of Doom. And it's, there aren't really wrong answers. If somebody is like, oh, Crystal Skull is my favorite by a lot, I'm like, why don't you tell me why? I would love to know how you got that much more enjoyment out of it.
Fair.
And it wouldn't be a debate. It would just be like, oh, I want to hear it. Especially like when there's a movie I don't like and somebody does, I'm like, what did you, and sometimes it comes off accusatory, but I'm like, what did you see in it that maybe I didn't, did I miss something? And
that's a very healthy way to ask that question.
Yeah, it's not great for social media or podcasting, though. So usually it's like, what are you, stupid? I talked about this recently. I did rage tweet from my seat after I saw that movie, Don't Worry, Darling. I was very emotional because I was so angry at that movie. And I did say that I would think that anybody who told me they liked it, I would think that they must be stupid. And then people told me they liked it. I'm like, that's just what I said in the moment. I don't really think you're stupid, but, maybe bad taste in film. Anyway, Phil, I want to turn to you right now and talk about just sort of your thoughts as you watched Dial of Destiny and as you watched the story unfold and everything.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a big swing to open up the movie in such a large way with the de-aging, because if it doesn't work, you're not in it. For me, it worked a lot. I felt like I was watching Harrison Ford, a younger version, back in the Nazi days. And, it felt like a great set piece. And I know people have their think pieces about, is it exactly like a Steven Spielberg sort of action scene? Fine, whatever, probably not. But at the same time, I was engaged, and so that put me right there in it. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I understand it's a lengthier Indiana Jones movie, but I don't know, just my eyes glued to the screen. I was having a ton of fun, and I was like, I don't necessarily need this to end. If it went on for another hour, fine.
So. Yeah, and a credit to James Mangold, by the way, who has made some great films that I really enjoyed, most notably Logan. But I think that, somebody else coming in and taking over the reins or taking over the whip, as it were, that's a pretty tall order. Not everybody would jump at that opportunity, but I think he did a great job. And yeah, I think that, having these great openings, the James Bond franchise is sort of wrote the book on it. It's like, well, let's kind of put you in a situation that we didn't lead up to it, but let's just see them get out of a mess that may or may not tie into the movie in general. In this case, it did. And, I referenced Mission Impossible earlier. They always start off with something that's like, do you really care what's going on? Let's just watch Ethan Hunt get out of some shit right now. Okay. Let's just see it happen. And this was great. I love that sequence. The de-aging, I think, was done in a very smart way. And not to beat up on Martin Scorsese, but the de-aging in The Irishman, the mistake there was using much older actors and having them move in a way that they moved as old men. So the younger versions didn't look quite right. Not every time, but there's a few moments that really stand out. Yeah. Also, de-aging technology, so much better every year, every time anybody uses it. Getting these, these like CGI characters. I mean, if you think about when we saw in Rogue One, the CGI creation of Grand Moff Tarkin, Peter Cushing, it was very jarring because he'd been dead for so long, but it actually looked pretty good, and I think that they did a good job in terms of everything, really, presenting the de-aging and all of that. Someone who is just ageless for all time, though, of course, is our friend Erik Nagel, Erik himself. Erik, it's Erik Nagel. Thank you for joining us here on the Bladtcast to talk Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Thank you for that ham-handed intro to your show.
These hands are dripping with ham, as always.
They are.
And, and we're just sort of talking big picture of the movie right now. It's a Bladtcast show, so the fact that we're 17 minutes in means we barely got warmed up. This is still the pre.
Much like a lot of my shows, yes, a lot of vamping, and then here's the point, and we got to go. Bye.
I'll share with Zach and Phil, who, by the way, this is Erik. I once did a show that Erik was doing with Brian Johnson of Tell Him Steve Dave, and he's like, "Oh, we're going to talk about David Letterman. Can you come on?" And we did an hour and a half. And he's like, "Yeah, so we didn't get to David Letterman. Do you want to come back next week?" And I'm like, "Sure." And we did eventually get to David Letterman the next week. But even still, it was still like another half hour.
In the industry, it's called a two-parter.
Yeah,
that's what
exactly.
Yeah.
But, we've been wanting more. In any case, Zach, I wanted to kind of get your big pictures of this movie itself. And we'll go from there.
Well, I'm gonna concur with Phil about the de-aging process. I thought I was blown away. It slightly took me out when Harrison Ford first opened his mouth and he sounded like an 83-year-old man. But then he was back into sounding a lot better. He must have cleared his throat or something because he was back to normal. Loved it. I always compare de-aging to Tron Legacy. And I'm like, if anybody can do it better than Tron Legacy, then that's great in my book. I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of not, because I love Tron Legacy, but that de-aging is terrible in that. So
it's not great.
It's not great at all. So that's my bar I set. I'm like, anybody do it better than that? It's fine with me. It was so just overall thought of the film. The best villain I think I've seen in a long time, the most compelling, and it shows how important it is to have such a quality actor. It's not taking away from any of the villains from previous films, because I think they were all equally good, but Mads Mikkelsen, or I forget how you say his last name. Yeah, he's such a powerful presence on screen. Even when he gets hit by a bar on a train and you're like, oh, he's got a little scar on his head. That's pretty impressive. Must have a head of stone. He's like Ronnie Garvin with his head. That's a wrestling.
I mean, he's a Nazi, so,
Yeah, they have hard heads.
Yeah. To the credit of him, I mean, he played Hannibal Lecter for 3 years on the TV series, and he didn't make you forget about Anthony Hopkins or Brian Cox, by the way, who originally.
That's my personal favorite from Manhunter.
Wow. We'll do a whole show on that, by the way.
I'm happy to join you.
I want to pull on that thread. I would love to talk about Manhunter, but we'll talk about this. And, it's like to come on and take a role of Hannibal Lecter on television and be in the conversation of like, okay, he's also great in a completely different way, you know? And I've rarely seen him and thought like, okay, well, he didn't work. I think he, as an ultimate villain, this was the perfect role for him. What did you think, Erik, about Mads Mikkelsen, but then the movie as a whole?
I thought it was great. It goes back to 80s and before that, the quintessential, almost maybe typical back then, very stern, silent villain type, where he says less, does more, and then he's not sitting there and like a Bond villain, like, let me tell you the plot while you're trying to figure out how to escape and all that.
Right.
He tells the plot to his henchmen, to other people who might have to be involved for some reason, but he's never telling Indiana Jones exactly what he's doing until it's that moment. They that's missing a lot in a lot of today's movies, because they tend to what's the term, telegraph at the beginning. It's like, oh, okay, this is where the whole outline of the movie's going, or if they revealed it all in the trailer because people need to know exactly what the movie is before they even go to see what the movie is. You didn't know, like you mentioned him getting hit in the head by the whatever the thing was over the train. You're like, all right, he's done. You didn't expect him to be as prevalent in the rest of the movie as he was at the beginning there. That I liked that a lot. Like they stuck to what movie making was for the villain role. Like he was there when he needed to be. His presence was felt when he wasn't there, and they kept him out of the story until it was necessary. So he wasn't just constantly overshadowing everything by physically being there. Just what else was going on in the story unraveling was all that was needed. He was the perfect choice for this, because I mean, who can play that kind of welcome to Sprockets kind of Nazi kind of person nowadays? And you were thinking Mads Mikkelsen, and then you go, wow, he really pulled it off. I don't know anybody that's as sinister that could pull off the role that's as sinister and almost slimy in a way. The way that villain was, but being calm, cool, collected, and staying towards the material, staying towards being true to the character without getting very comic booky or candid or something like that. I liked it a lot. I liked his part in there a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's not every actor comes off as evil before they even open their mouth. You know, it doesn't matter how they're dressed. It doesn't matter what they say. And yeah, I know what you're saying, that so many movies you feel telegraphed of like, oh, this is going to be important later. It's the example I always use is, you know, obviously the formula for Law and Order has worked very well for the past 30 years. But you're like, oh, wow, recognized name actor. Yeah, I don't know nothing about nothing. Oh, okay, let's move on. No, I wonder if that actor is going to show up again in the second half of the show, in the courtroom portion of it. Phil, let's talk a little bit about Mads Mikkelsen, and then we'll move on to talk about some of the rest of the cast. But your thoughts on our villain and how, you know, he and Harrison Ford play off each other, de-aged and present day.
Yeah, I mean, I like you guys. I thought he was wonderful. You know, I mean, he just plays a great villain. I'm even thinking about like Fantastic Beasts 3, right? He stepped into that villain role.
Right, yeah. That's right.
And so he's just, he's got this gruff about him. Like, I mean, he's just kind of like a man's man, you know, which like is counter to Indy, right? Because he's also a man's man. So the two of them, you know, and he's a lot more cerebral. I think that's what kind of you guys are hinting at, is rather than have to tell you everything, he's just, you can see his gears working, and you're like, I don't necessarily know what he's planning, but something's in there. And so I thought the economy of his dialogue was really well done. And, you know, he's doing a lot of, as they say in acting, I guess, a lot of business on the camera, you know, to convey that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to, I guess, what is the role, the character that, of course, Twitter is the quickest to jump on in any kind of film, which is younger female lead, Helena, of course, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. And, you know, I think that it is, you know, it's tough to have those characters and have them work. All you need to really do, and yes, it was a male character, but look back to Crystal Skull and here's Shia LaBeouf, you know, the future of Indiana Jones. Well, no, not really, but, you know, nice try. And I think that this character worked well because you know, she had the background, she had the knowledge, we understood why she was there, and their dynamic was funny. And fortunately, this was like his goddaughter, so there wasn't, you know, 80-year-old Harrison Ford and, I don't know, early 30s actress where we're dealing with weird chemistry. You know, that immediately gets thrown out the window, which I think helped, in all honesty, because sometimes in movies you're like, what are we supposed to be feeling between these two right now? I don't know. But let me circle back on that with you, Phil. Talk a little bit about Phoebe Waller-Bridge in this movie.
Yeah, like you said, I really enjoyed it for those specific reasons. I was with somebody I was kind of like at an advanced screening, and I went with a friend, and she was like, you know what? I'm glad that they didn't sexualize her, because you can even look at like Alicia Vikander's Tomb Raider, and I'm not saying Phoebe Waller-Bridge isn't a gorgeous woman, but they didn't lean in on that. You know, she had her intelligence, she had her wit and stuff like that, and she really was essentially just a younger version of Indy, right? And that's why they kind of clashed heads. They had different ideologies. I mean, he's always been about it belongs in a museum, right? And that's kind of a running joke in this movie, where she wants to steal it. And so, you know, it felt like a family, right? She's his goddaughter, but for all intents and purposes, she could have very easily been his daughter, and they're just butting heads, right? And so, you know, going off of Crystal Skull, like, I enjoyed this relationship far more than I did with Mutt. R.I.P. to Mutt.
Yeah.
Are we spoiling, by the way?
Yes, we can talk all spoilers about this movie. You know, we're like halfway. Well, not. I know how long.
Otherwise, oopsies.
No. We're 25 minutes in, and yes, we're spoiling everything. Also, Eric, I know you'll appreciate that
Mutt's dead.
Character.
Oh,
well,
sorry.
No, well, that too. But Mutt is being credited as having been given the Poochie treatment, in that he was killed off camera.
That's exactly what I thought. Thank you for making that reference. That's exactly what I thought, is because they didn't really get to it until later about what happened with the character, or why he wasn't involved with all this stuff.
Yeah.
I did feel it was the Poochie treatment, but I also, if you don't know what the Poochie treatment is, it's a reference from The Simpsons, where they created a third character for their Itchy and Scratchy show. People didn't like it. And then they just did no, everyone liked Roy. Then they just like, oh yeah, he died on his way back to his home planet, and they didn't animate it. They just took the animation cell and went off the background like that into the screen. And it's like he just died on the way back to his home planet, and then it said the end, and then the audience went crazy, like, yes, that's fantastic.
Shout out to Poochie, by the way. He was a real one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, look at him.
Look at that character.
He's loud and extreme. He's in your face.
You can tell by the backwards hat. Anyway, sorry.
Well, that's fine.
I felt like it was important to explain the Poochie phenomenon to people who might not know. And
if you want to take it a step further, Simpsons predicted it. Like, you know, they came up with this, and then wow, they did it for Indiana Jones. The Simpsons predicted that that's what was going to happen to Mutt. I do want to bring one quick thing up with Mutt. Isn't it interesting that, I guess technically in this world, the character could have still existed had Shia LaBeouf not played that character? If it was any other actor, they may have done something with it and continued it on. That this actor was not really bad in the role, but just him in general, his life, his connection with Hollywood was so bad that they go, we're just getting rid of this character altogether. Like, the actor ruined the character, not he did a bad performance, or the audience didn't really like his interpretation of the character. The actor himself, his real life, killed the imaginary character that he portrayed. So when they didn't bring him back, I was like, wow, he was that powerful and that terrible that they just said the character doesn't exist anymore. We're going to kill it off without any real reason.
Yes,
that's almost TV level bad of writing it off. Chuck goes upstairs, you never see him again.
Oh, poor Chuck. Yeah, I think that that phenomenon will one day be known as Ezra Millering. You know, a specific actor tied to a character basically brings down an entire movie studio.
But it didn't kill the character off. Yeah, Ezra Miller will be replaced or rebooted when James Gunn does his DCU stuff.
That's true. Yeah.
And then there's the TV version. Like, there's always going to be the character's never not going to be back. He killed the character. Shia LaBeouf is still here, but the character is gone forever.
Mutt Jones has passed on. You're absolutely right.
He's not coming back.
No. Yeah, and I think it's something that you needed to do. You know, like when we're talking about movie franchises. And, you know, we're obviously focused on, you know, the Indiana Jones here. But for me, why Die Hard with a Vengeance was so much better than the second one, which I don't want to get into a debate with Zach, because I feel like that's probably happened on your show. But
no, I agree with you. I agree with you.
One, it was a script that existed, and they were like, great, let's take this great script and turn it into a Die Hard movie.
Yeah.
And also, though, they were like, oh, yeah, so John McClane's on the outs with his wife. We're not going to see her. He doesn't really talk to his kids right now. Let's have him go on this adventure. And I think for him to be isolated, Henry Jones, Indiana Jones, when this movie starts, I think is very smart because of the way that last one ended. But I think it's the same as the passage in real time, right? It's like 15 years since that movie. It's 1969. So about the same. So I think it was important to just have him detached from maybe what our expectation was. You know, he, Marion, and Mutt, you know, out in the suburbs somewhere, you know, going to the malt shop or whatever they were doing in the 50s. So I think it was really important to kind of give us this iteration of him. And my understanding is that Harrison Ford thought it was very important to show him warts and all. I don't know that I needed to see him with his shirt off, but boy, did it have the impact that they intended.
Hang on, speak for yourself here. You know, there's plenty of other people that may disagree with you.
I was happy to see that too. It was glorious. I was like, damn, I want to look like that when I'm 83.
I'd like to look like that when I'm 47.
I didn't have a problem with the shirt off. I don't know if anyone else had this problem. It's like, didn't it just feel out of place for him being in New York? Like anybody else in their career, sometimes when they progress to see them finally at an older stage where they're in New York or LA, for most industries, like, okay, they're at the pinnacle of their career. For him, it didn't make sense unless he was working for like the Museum of Natural History or something like that.
Yeah.
It made no sense for him working at some kind of dinky college in New York City. He could have just stayed at the university in Indiana, still being separated from his family or whatever else was going on, but still tied to that part of the franchise that was funding all his expeditions and their museum and all. Like, it didn't seem like he was tied to anything from the past anymore. It just was weird to put him there. Like, oh, here he is in generated New York City. And it's just like, why is he in the city? He's not a city guy like that.
Yeah.
I think that it does raise the question of, why is he there? And I think it's really just a storytelling trick because they're like, we want to have this sequence in New York running through Times Square on a horse.
Someone thought like, what if he rode a horse on the subway? Great. Let's build a quarter of the movie around this thing here. And you go, really, for the sight gag?
I mean, and it was a fun sequence. I enjoyed it. And if he was in Indiana, like, what is he going to be running through? What is he going to be around?
It was an interesting sequence. I mean, I did enjoy it. It felt like, why New York though? You didn't need to be there.
What do you think about that, Phil? Sort of making a storytelling choice for the character that maybe didn't make sense. I don't think it derailed it. It took away. But when you're like, but we really want him to be in New York. I mean, I don't even think that's necessarily what it was. But what do you think about this idea that he's ended up in New York?
I didn't question it. I mean, I was just there for the ride in that sense. And I mean, so much just like it felt like a world that was lived in. And so, you know, I trusted that like whatever happened between Crystal Skull and now happened, right? And so it's hinted at between the divorce, Mutt dying and stuff like that it's like, oh, he's just living in New York, you know? And you know, as you age, like it's one of those counterintuitive things, because my mom's a nurse, she talks about this a lot. You know, you want to get away from the city, but as you age, you have more health issues, so you kind of need to stay in the city for the medical care. So you know what? Maybe that was his consideration as he's
good point.
Getting up there.
To tie onto that, all right, didn't think of that, but also it just dawned on me how many times in the first three movies when he had to fly to somewhere, they show the map and then the plane dots. It's always going through New York. So maybe he was just tired of connecting in New York and he said, like, I'll just start from New York and go to Monaco.
That damn layover.
Direct flights. Just makes it so easy.
Yeah.
It does,
you know what? Sometimes that's really what it comes down to, you know.
Convenience,
Erik, I'm sure you've heard comedians who relocate to a city basically because it's like, well, there's all these reasons, and it's a hub of an airline. You know? So that when you do gigs, it's still a little easier. What are you thinking, Zach, as we kind of talk about all this stuff? You know, the background of the character, the sequence in New York, any of this really.
Erik brought up the subway, the subway horse scene that I did. I'm sorry, but I was immediately brought back to an 80s movie called Quiet Cool, starring James Remar, who played Ajax in The Warriors, and Nick Cassavetes is in that as well.
You lost me until you said Warriors, because I of course know that movie. What is the name of the movie again?
It's called Quiet Cool. And there's a great sequence where James Remar is on a BMX motorcycle and he chases a guy on roller skates through the New York subway, and they go through the subway train on the motorcycle. The movie deals with pot dealers on the West Coast. It's a pretty wild film. I highly recommend it. But it brought me back to that scene. I'm like, whoa, this is just like Quiet Cool. And everyone in the theater looked at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, and I think if somebody had given that note to James Mangold or Harrison Ford, it'd be like, what? And by the way, for our visual audience, here's this. It's so funny. Sometimes something looks like the one sheet, the movie poster, and then other times you're like, oh, this is clearly the VHS box.
Yeah, totally.
It was the artwork that was available.
Because it's always that a lot of those movies from the 80s always have the photoshopped hand holding the gun that's not the actor holding the gun, and it's the wrong way. Like, is he holding it like this against his face? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
I love it, and I love the blurb: nonstop action from the makers of A Nightmare on Elm Street and Mortal Kombat, but clearly not the directors of either of those films.
And the star of Mortal Kombat Part 2. It's a clear that probably got released in the 90s. I was going to shout out one other quick little 80s movie that is a ripoff of Indiana Jones. It's called Treasure of the Four Crowns. If you've never seen Treasure of the Four Crowns, it's in 3D. And in fact, you can get a Blu-ray with the 3D glasses. And it is, in my opinion, one of the best ripoffs of Indiana Jones. And that there's a 20-minute sequence where there's no dialogue. It's just him going into get this special scepter or this little key, and he's having to fight off, owls and vultures and pterodactyls on strings with light eyes.
So you're saying it's better than Alan Quatermain?
It is better than Alan Quatermain.
All right.
Down.
Hot take from Zach here.
Hands down. Treasure of the Four Crowns. Go look it up. Ennio Morricone did the soundtrack for it as well. Something about this, this.
If I wasn't convinced now, I would just want to hear the soundtrack, of course.
It's pretty wild. Pretty well. So Erik and Phil both hit on something that I think is important. I think they both did. This film, the dynamics with the female protagonist and Indy felt different than any other film in the franchise, where there wasn't this romantic link. And I think going back to my kind of take on it being more kid friendly, this, my son is like, he's 9. He's like, how much romance is in this movie? Like, is it a lot? Is there a little bit? Like, it depends, This movie felt so tame as far as the romance was concerned. And I think that kind of appeals to a younger audience because, a lot of kids oftentimes put their hands on their face. Oh, I don't want to see the kissing. But the level of violence was still there. The kills were still there. The intensity was still there. I kind of liked it being less about this romantic subplot that so often his movies have, and just sticking to the adventure and the story. That was great. And then the tail end of the movie with Marion, like that was really sweet. And I thought it was done well, but it wasn't drawn out too long. Yeah. And there was a nostalgic nod to the first one. I found that super appealing overall. I think and it was nice to see the kind of family dynamic. It wasn't like, this didn't feel like it was going to pass the torch to a new era of indie films. This felt like a nice bookend. Like, this is it. This is cool. I'm cool with that.
This is the tribe has spoken moment in Survivor where they extinguish the torch, and it's like, yeah, we saw that. What were you going to say, Erik?
No, it's interesting what he said. It's like, it doesn't feel like this is the passing of the torch or the next stage of whatever Indiana Jones is going to be. Sorry, my mic's shorting a little bit. But before the movie was even out, what's her name? Phoebe Waller-Bridge was saying that she was hinting at this, like, no, I really hope they do a spin-off of my character and stuff. And you go, I don't even know what the character is yet. Why is she saying, why isn't it spinning off for me? You can look it up. It's on several different websites.
No, I mean, it would make sense. And also, I mean, sometimes actors say that so that, hopefully that there's a demand,
I know that's more of a modern day technique, which sometimes works. A lot of times it doesn't. But when you're going into a franchise that a lot of people are skeptical of already because they don't know, at least at the time when she made the comment, people hadn't seen the movie yet. And you're seeing some of the trailer, and you're like, all right, you don't know if she's a villain, but she's belittling him a lot, and a lot of people weren't into that. Oh, he's the old codger that doesn't know anything or how to do anything anymore. And I think a lot of people were starting to get reserved going into it. Like you were already changing people's minds who were pretty much open to go see this. It's like, wait, why is she saying that I need to be spun off? Why is this going on here? What are they doing to him? You know, you start thinking the South Park clip where they're watching Crystal Skull and they're you just see Lucas and Spielberg pinning him down and everyone in the theater screaming and yelling.
And now Erik came in a little late. Now Zach is the only one who hasn't referenced it.
I'm the only one who hasn't seen it. Yeah,
Erik had a much more PG way of describing it, though.
Yeah,
I was getting raped at the time. By Steven Spielberg.
Well, to peel back to childhood innocence from that, I love what you were saying, Zach. That I have this vision now that your son is Fred Savage in the beginning of Princess Bride. You know, telling Peter Falk, "Wait, this isn't a kissing book, is it?" So he's like, "Dad, this isn't a kissing movie, is it?"
I kid you not. We were watching Princess Bride last year for the first time, and there's a scene where right before Fred Savage drops that line, my son goes, "Is this a kissing movie?" And then, like, without missing a beat, and I looked at him and go, "Have you seen this before? Did you watch it without me?" Or something. Straight up. But he used to call in the last Starfighter from the 80s. There's a scene at the end of the movie where the two main characters, they kiss each other, right?
Sure.
Catherine Mary Stewart and
spoiler.
Sorry. And after he saves the world and the kid and the little brother looks at this and sees them kissing, goes, diarrhea. Lance gasping Catherine Mary Stewart. And so ever since we watched that movie, every time someone would kiss on screen, my son goes, diarrhea. So he would say to me, he's like, how much diarrhea is in this movie before it turned into romance? And I go, there's so much diarrhea in this film. There's diarrhea everywhere.
I laugh because my son doesn't do that, but I can see he's about to turn 8 in like a week and a half. And I'm like, I can see that actually being the logical progression because it's coming, but if there were to be a lot of actual diarrhea in a movie, he'd be like, well, that sounds funny to me. So, but anyway, diarrhea notwithstanding, let's go kind of through the story. And I do love that we get the benchmarks. One of the things that I think my son will love when he finally gets around to watching these is watching the little dots on the map and traveling around.
Yeah.
And, starting from New York, so he doesn't have to get the connecting flight. Phil, as we examine the story, I personally feel like they do such a great job in the first 2 acts. I start to have a problem with the big event that we'll talk about, sort of what the movie's building towards. It doesn't ruin the movie for me. I still enjoyed it. I still had a lot of fun. But what are you thinking about sort of the way that they tell this story? The fact that the Dial of Destiny gets stolen and having to go to Morocco and have some crazy adventures, all that, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, some people are like, I know they're complaining that they didn't exactly know what the dial technically did, but I never had an issue with it. I kind of guessed. I mean, just based off of the title, based off of what they were saying, I kind of inferred it. And yeah, I mean, it's the classic MacGuffin of like, all right, we got to get these pieces, and it was a little bit fetch questy, but that's what made it fun for me, of just them trying to figure it out along the way of how do we get all these pieces together or prevent, Mads Mikkelsen from doing so, right? And yeah, I like the chase sequence. I don't know, I had fun with it, and especially like the comedic elements of what was her fiance like chasing after them as well. Yeah, it was silly, but I enjoyed it. It was just a character moment, right? And it added something to the scene, so I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and in taking the blueprint of Short Round, we got the addition of Teddy that I feel like for people that are seeing this movie with their kid, it's great for them to immediately have somebody to identify with. He seems like he's a little older than Short Round, but that's not really the point. There's like, all right, there's somebody who's closer to my age, and that's how I would feel if all this crazy stuff was going on around me. And I mean the chase, the race, a lot of those elements are definitely a lot of fun. And it's what you look for from an Indiana Jones movie or an action movie in general. How did you feel that played out, Erik?
One of the chase scenes, look, it didn't take me out of, like, I enjoyed the chase scenes, but I kept sitting there and going, that little scooter that's pulling the three of them is not outrunning that German tank monster Rolls Royce, whatever car they had there, through these little side streets. It fits around the bends, yes, but that thing, in real life, sounds just like a go-kart engine, And I'm like, how is it keeping up with that car? And then when it finally got to that last part where it sputters and kind of blew up, and like, oh, this thing isn't reliable. It's like, wait, that whole chase, it was reliable, but right here on these cobblestone streets next to a step, all of a sudden now this is where it's having a hard time. I enjoyed the chase stuff, the train stuff at the beginning, that stuff in the middle. That is Indiana Jones. That's what you're wanting. And for people who would say, oh, some of this stuff is kind of a trope or whatever, it's like a bit cornball or whatever. This movie, this franchise didn't create that stuff. It was based on these old movies from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s.
Right.
But it was doing a service for it where it was amplifying that these adventures are fun. You're going to enjoy this kind of stuff if done right and in the right environment, which Indiana Jones was, because they weren't doing that in the 80s anymore. It was all, muscle guys and big gun movies and stuff. And you didn't have this kind of adventure thing. Now, more than ever, they're not doing that at all. Like, people don't even remember, younger people don't even know that existed at this point. So when you're seeing some of these things and you go, okay, the joke about the map, seeing like that's at least 100 years old, doing that in movies. But they brought that back. You're seeing this thing here. There's a submarine. There's the fishing boats, all this stuff. You're like, this is exactly what you wanted. All the action sequences. Then there's a little pause. The next act where people are moving, dialogue's happening, setting up for the next big action sequence. It had everything. The only thing I found difficult was dealing with what's her name, Helena, Phoebe Wallace.
Helena.
There are times where, all right, she's moving the story around and she's in the right place at the right time, but then there's times where it's like, shut up. Just shut up. Like when she's on the fishing boat and you've got Antonio Banderas there, and that's like, let him talk. It's his boat. Let him get into the mix of this thing here. And she's telling Indy he's too old. She's doing this. And then we see later, there's a wink. She's trying to, set these people up. But it's just, there was too much of it. And I think that's always been sort of a problem with these movies, where maybe with the exception of Karen Allen, she wasn't trying to compete. She was a love interest, but she was doing her own thing too. Kate Capshaw, we know, was terrible. Kate Blanchett, it was the...
Well, she might have been terrible in the... Kate Capshaw might have been terrible in the movie, but she got an Academy Award for breaking up Steven Spielberg's marriage. So, there are different levels of achievement, I suppose.
There is,
wow.
But I'm sidetracking back to the adventure stuff. So, yeah, I loved all the adventure stuff.
Wow, like you even got a bell.
Oh, boy.
Wow, that is an old... That looks like the bell from Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Whoa! Yeah, this bell was a gift for Bladtcast episode 100 from one of our biggest fans, Matt and KC, a very beloved member of the family, and we are indeed at episode 549 now. So the bell still has some ding left in it. I don't even know why Zach has a bell.
Mine's from Crate and Barrel or Z Gallery before it went out of business. So
wow,
nice. Anyway,
sorry. Weapon than a bell.
Sorry, it just had to
before the bell talk got in there. And so I understand comparing sort of. It is a very different female character. So finish your thought on that.
But the action stuff. I even thought not the submarine, the underwater sequences,
diving.
Yeah, even though it was like it's a little bit far fetched, but the way they were like, all right, what they're doing, it's treasure hunting, it's underwater. All I was expecting was, to have his shirt ripped off and put a knife in between his teeth, and then he's fighting sharks with his hand to get down there to get to the treasure. We had eels this time because eels are snakes underwater, so it ties in with the whole history of his snake issue.
That was funny, by the way. Funny.
I agree. Yeah.
When they made when he's like, "Don't say snakes," or whatever.
Yeah. But it had all the action sequences were spot on for going back to the movies of those times. Like, yes, they would have done this at this time. Yes, The underwater breathing apparatus thing was a stretch, but they needed to get them from here to there. So that was like probably the most tamest way to do it for the time period without the technology, all of that stuff. But I loved all the action stuff, boats blowing up, stuff underwater, train, people on the train and fights and shooting and animals showing up out of nowhere. Like, it had everything an Indiana Jones film was supposed to have.
Well, I agree. It checks all the boxes for what you want from Indiana Jones, the thrills, the fun that you want from an action adventure film. And let me ask you, Zach, is there some direct to VHS, I don't know, Michael Pare and Frank Stallone movie that I don't know about, where there was like a big underwater heist or something that you can think of?
Well, when Erik mentioned the knife in the mouth fighting a shark, I thought of that the zombie film, Lucio Fulci's Zombie, where the zombie is fighting the shark underwater. It's an amazing sequence. That's really cool.
I love that there was something. It just wasn't what I thought, but I love it.
And if you like underwater and zombies, check out Shockwaves from the 80s. It might actually be 1970, early 70s, but with Peter Cushing. Right around the time he did Star Wars. Shockwaves is really cool. Zombie Nazis in the water. But I agree with what you're saying, Erik. Like, there are times when I'm watching these sequences and I'm going, oh, that's, very far-fetched, but you just got to give into it, right? You just got to just let yourself go into it. I keep coming back to this idea that this film is it's a nice film for kids and for like older people. I can my whole family went to the movies. So my wife's parents, who were in their late 70s, middle to late 70s. My father-in-law, who I never talked to about anything, he's a big train aficionado. So he was like so excited to see the train sequence. And he falls asleep in movies because he's like 74, 75. He was awake the entire time. Along with my son who's sitting next to him. They're geeking out on all these sequences. And I think that's a cool thing that is sadly missing. You said that, I think you said that, Erik, that like, we don't get this stuff anymore. We haven't seen these things, these tropes that have been around for 100 years, but it shows how good they are when you reuse something that was done 100 years ago and it still has the same effect. People still go, whoa, instead of like, where's the lasers? Where's the dinosaur? Like, that's cool and all, but it was refreshing to see like old school
adventure style movies.
Adventure.
You don't see that
style.
Much anymore.
Like Treasure of the Four Crowns.
Right. And also, because you mentioned it recently, we got to give a shout out to Shockwaves. It is indeed starring Peter Cushing and John Carradine. So
yes.
Give a shout out there. And
it's great.
Once they were almost human. How this who owns this intellectual property, Zach? That's the real question. Because
I mean, come on,
why it hasn't come back during the zombie craze is beyond me.
That movie looks like it would have been back in the days of video rental stores. That movie looks like it would have been on the shelves under like Matt's Picks or something like that. One of the clerks knew that movie and put that there because otherwise you never thought to look for that movie.
Nope.
Yeah, but then you would know to trust Matt the next time you went in because, like, oh man, he definitely made sure that I got to find out a great film there. And I know it's interesting because in this summer blockbuster season we had this movie and we also got a new Mission Impossible, and they're not similar in a lot of ways, but in the let's pack a lot of globe-trotting thrill a minute in there. And I don't know if any of you have seen Dead Reckoning Part 1 yet, but I saw it earlier this week.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's very consistent. It's like, it's the same in a good way as all the other ones. And it's like, yeah, we just have to raise the stakes. The big stunt in the commercial isn't even the craziest stunt that they pull off. So you're just like,
that's
oh,
good.
wow. Okay. Yeah.
That's great that they don't I hate when they reveal all that stuff in the trailers and then you go watch the movie and you go, oh, that was the big, like one of the dumbest ones, but the best example for this is I think it was like Terminator 3 that came out like a decade ago or something. Yeah. And you see on a bridge or a highway or something, and there's Arnold Schwarzenegger now fighting naked younger Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yes. Just like a quick scene of it. And then you see the movie and you go, wait, that was part of the ending. Like, why did they put this in there? That should have been the surprise. So the fact that they didn't put whatever the big Tom Cruise stunt is in this movie anywhere in the trailer is already I want to go see it. Not that I didn't want to, but that's a great selling point.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Obviously, we should shout out John Rhys Davies. We got a visit from Sala. In the chat, Dominica Saxon says, I did miss seeing Ke Huy Quan in this movie, Short Round. They should have bent over backwards to get him in. You know, if they went into production a year from now, maybe the Antonio Banderas character or somebody is Short Round, you know. But that's all right. I think that it's more the matter of the time that this was, that they didn't feel the need to include him. And
I think.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I didn't even step on you.
Well, no, what I was going to say about speaking of Antonio Banderas, you know, that scene, Eric, you were talking about Phoebe Waller-Bridge is speaking so much in there. It's like, and again, we're talking spoilers. It's like, well, he's going to die, so you know, maybe give him a little bit more time to talk.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, but I was kind of hoping that I sensed it, but I was like, don't kill him off. He's an interesting, newer character, another old friend of Indy's that we're being introduced to. If you want to do spin-offs and stuff, I would have loved to seen all these old contacts that he had around the world somehow interacting with each other in a new series of movies, like an Indiana Jones movie or in the franchise, and then it's whatever it is with Jonathan Rhys Davies showing up or maybe leading a group of other explorers into something. Like the Antonio Banderas character, I'm forgetting his name. I had the thing here. Ronaldo. When they brought Ronaldo in, I was like, this is interesting. He's kind of quirky. He's this weird Greek. It was Greek, right? Or Cyprus?
Yes.
This weird Greek guy coming in here. He's got attitude. He's a man's man kind of deal. He's very weathered. He knows the world. I'm like, he would have been great to see go off on some of these other adventures, and they just did what they did with him, and I found that to be a bit disappointing. And she didn't let him say any kind of last words before
not nearly enough. Yeah.
No, not at all.
Well, as we begin the process of winding down our conversation, I want to turn towards, you know, the third act, the big reveal, the Dial of Destiny. And before I share my thoughts, I'll go with each of you and just see what you think. Phil, give us your thoughts on, you know, as we're building towards seeing if we can make the Dial of Destiny work, figuring out if we as an audience are going to see it work, and then it works. Boy, they sure end up in the wrong place. What do you think about that sequence, Phil?
I mean, for me, I thought the big sort of ending was going to be when, they're kind of going through, the caves and stuff like that and getting it, right? Like, I thought that's where things would culminate. So what came after that, as far as the plane sequence and there, in many ways was mentally uncharted territory for me, because I was like, where's this headed? And I don't think it's as clean as it could have been, but overall, it's one of those things, like, if you buy into kind of the absurdity of it or not. And there's always been a supernatural element to Indiana Jones anyway. I think the big thing for me was will Indy stay, won't he stay? And I thought, like, the fact that it hinged on an emotional aspect is what really made it work for me, less so than the action set piece element of it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that you had a lot of the same thoughts that I did, and just sort of wondering, is this thing going to work? Are we going to see it? What did you think, Zach?
Well, I was, by the way, that doesn't look like Pedro Pascal, the drawing of Antonio Banderas in the poster.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, this is the Asian one sheet, but I believe that this is the one for China. So you're talking about down here.
Yes.
Yeah.
It looks like Pedro Pascal a little bit.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with you, Phil. I thought that the final sequence of getting the other half of the dial was going to be it. Finding the tomb, and I liked that sequence. I would have been okay with it kind of ending there with that sequence not being the bigger payoff that you saw a few moments later. And yeah, I think a lot of people who've kind of crapped on that final sequence forget that there's always been a supernatural aspect of Indiana Jones. It's always been a little wacky, a little wild. And I love that. I love the fantasy aspect of it. I was a little let down a little bit, because I'm like, well, it just it felt like they handled it so quickly, being in that world, and then suddenly they're out. I would have liked to have seen, I don't know, maybe a little bit more of that, of his, I don't know, Indy, like actually being there, living there for a moment, and then, what's her name? The main actress, Helena coming back and saying, okay, no, we're done. I thought it was handled really well, and I liked that. I wanted to see more of a dramatic death of the villains, and I don't think you saw enough of that. I thought it was more. I would have liked to seen. My son even said that, he's like, there was no face melting. I'm like, I know, it would have been kind of nice to see them burning up in the plane and screaming, because they deserve to die that way.
Yeah, no, that's like the one thing that we're allowed to still root for the Nazis' faces to melt, I think. And to your point, Indy even says in this movie, and it's interestingly, it's a very Force Awakens Han Solo vibe of, they're both really like, there's stuff that I can't explain. So it's like, I don't want to believe in weird stuff, but I've seen some weird stuff. Yeah. And I think that it's important to remind us that has happened. And there's choices that there's a few different ways they could have presented the end of this movie, but I think that what they went with mostly worked. But I'll share my thoughts on it a little bit. But I wanted to give Erik a chance to say what he thought about sort of the culmination of the quest for the Dial of Destiny, and then actually using it and seeing what happened next.
I did. There's part of that movie that I thought about like days after having seen the movie, and I was like, man, maybe I need to give this a second viewing. I haven't yet, but a second viewing, because there was something I wasn't quite sure on, where they get the dial together, they use it, and they wind up in the time period of Archimedes. Was it explained, or was it already understood and I missed it, that dial, they thought they were going to go somewhere else in time, and it brought it back to Archimedes' time? Like Archimedes' time was the fixed point, the base point for using that device. Like you could start from here, go somewhere else, but then use it again and you come back. Like it's only a one-way ticket in that way of using the dial.
I think that the explanation, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think in the moment it seemed like they just said it wrong, and so they didn't go back to 1938, ready to, basically depose Hitler and, learn from his mistakes. But it is an interesting point that because, they weren't off by 100 years or, 6 months.
They brought it right back to a specific time where that dial was supposed to be known.
Maybe that's the question, where that's like from whenever you open it, you just go back to that point. Maybe, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Phil?
Yeah, so the explanation I heard, there's Helena, in one of the scenes, right? She's talking about how you think you're getting a choice, but she knows how to direct you in a certain way, right? So the dial, for whatever reason, like when Archimedes made it, like it already happened that they went back in time, and so he made it knowing that they would come back in time, and so like no matter how you adjusted it, it essentially would take you there. Now, as far as the logic of the rest of it, like in theory, sure, I guess you can like go through one of these fissures and end up somewhere else. But based on knowing this, you ended up back there. Like it was always going to happen. It's just one of those weird things about like time travel in general. Like, can you really explain it properly without having a crap ton of plot holes? Probably not, but that's as close as I've heard to explaining it.
Well,
it's like
that
using
is the beauty. Go ahead, Erik.
I was saying it's like using a drone. You can send it off and it goes out over the highway, but as soon as the battery starts going low, it hits the automatic thing and it knows to come back to the point that it left from.
Yeah, that is to what Phil was saying. That's the beauty of time travel, is that the rules of it can be whatever you want it to be for your movie. I always use the example of Avengers Endgame, where like the fundamental rule of time travel has always been don't interact with your past self. And in Avengers Endgame, Nebula shoots an earlier version of herself dead, and she's still alive. So it's like, all right, time travel. And I guess
time travel.
Back to the Future was bullshit. But
and that's a fun trope now since Back to the Future. Anytime time travel from 85 up, if the movie is set in that time, 85 up, whenever they talk time travel, they always reference Back to the Future, which is viewed to be the most unrealistic or unobtainable version of time travel. Like it shouldn't work that way. But every time travel trope now references Back to the Future. It's like the wrong thing at the wrong time, but that's what everybody bases on. Even in Avengers, they mention Back to the Future, and you just laugh at it. I'm like, oh, that's the fixed point now for time travel.
Even in The Flash, they talk about Back to the Future.
Right.
But I want to get to Zach's thought just quickly in the chat. Eric Connor, who was unable to join us today, but we appreciate him watching along. Agreed, it was a homing beacon. Basically, they didn't accidentally arrive at the starting point.
Okay,
and
that's cool. Yeah,
I thought I missed something. Yeah,
I was hoping it'd make him jump into the bodega from Regarding Henry. So thank you for that, Eric. Second Regarding Henry reference that I didn't know we were going to get.
Very nice.
Amazing. I mean, that's kind of teeing up what I was about to say, sort of, because I thought it would have been funny if they put the dial together and it ends up being just a chintzy decoder ring, that says like, be sure to drink your Ovaltine for the story. But then as they dispose of the Nazis, and then suddenly it clicks and it works. And then they go into the world sans Nazis because they're all dead. Sans bad guys. It's simply just good guys. And it turns into that 80s TV show Explorers, Voyagers. If you guys have never seen that show, where it was a guy and a kid, and
it was
that would have been pretty rad.
They were like running into George Washington and stuff. It was like a quantum leap Voyagers, which I hadn't thought about that show in a while.
It was sponsored, by the way, by like the American Library Association or something like that, because it encouraged kids to go read books
back then. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Eric has a great punctuation for what he said, which of course would be regarding Indy.
That's amazing.
So, Henry is his real name, though. So
yes, nice, Phil.
Yeah.
Bing. Good observation.
I won't do mine because
all right. So Eric, and then
to finish up with the timepiece and all that. I liked where they did go back there. I do think they gave him the wrong happy ending for the movie. Like they gave him a happy ending after all that his life's been and reuniting with Marion and having them to deal with the passing of their son and where their lives are and all that stuff. And then they gave him a happy ending for the movie. But I think the happier ending would have been he wanted to stay in that time period. And Helena's like, you can't stay here. Like, this is where I started really hating her. I'm like, the guy wants to be here. He spent his whole life living in the past. Let him die. Who gets to die in the past or in the scenario that you've fantasized about all your life? Leave him there. Let him do what he's going to do. Like, I was expecting he stays there somewhere in the future. They do another archaeological dig and they find something. And then in a museum is like his hat and his whip or something like that. And that's how it goes out.
Like
that's pretty cool.
I thought that would have been the happier ending than him getting the girl at the end.
Well, I think that, you sort of bend reality far enough by having them go back there. The idea that he would live however long back there, and I guess he would have died. So I guess it wouldn't have mattered. But yeah, I know what you're saying, that it's almost like that's what he wanted. But I think even he realized that, happily ever after for both Harrison Ford and Bill Murray is ending up with Karen Allen. And I think that's the important
thing.
He
didn't realize she drugged him or he got knocked out or I forgot what it was. He woke up in his bed in New York City. And he's like,
but eventually he's happy as that.
Imagine doing that to a female character, right? And then all of a sudden she just wakes up, didn't have the choice to do whatever. And it's like, oh, I took you away from there. You're now back here again. I'm sitting there. I'm like, the guy didn't even have the choice. Like, you didn't convince him. You didn't say, like, look, you're missing so much. You really need to go back to the future and live your life there. They didn't. He got knocked out or drugged. I forgot what it was, but then he woke up on the bed and he's like, well, I guess I'm not staying in the past now. I'm back here in this shithole apartment.
I'm back in New York. Yeah. I feel I'm fully aware that I know you have to go momentarily, but I wanted to just make my final thought while the four of us were all together is that I think that, yes, there is this mysticism, this otherworldly faction in these Indiana Jones movies. There's a part of me that would have liked it if the dial opened We never actually saw where the Nazis went, but maybe they just came crashing back through it and died in the present. We don't know if it worked. I think the sequence works better for the story, but there was a little part of me that was like, oh, I didn't want Indiana Jones to go back in time, actually, and it was one of those things that it sat with me, and I'm like, no, it's fine. It's okay for the story. But in the moment I was like, oh, I didn't want him to end up back in the past, but great sequence, fun to watch, and interacting with Archimedes was fun. And that's why you have to learn ancient languages, kids, because you never know when you're going to end up in a time portal and get to talk to some of the greats. Phil, I'm going to let you go first, but thank you for your time. And please let people know where they can find you and your podcast and other presence you have online.
Sure. I'm at Phil Svitek on pretty much every social media. And I have a podcast. It's called Phil Svitek Podcast. I try to just impart lessons in the creative business, so if you want to be a writer, podcaster, filmmaker, whatever, I try to pave the way through the lessons I've learned.
Yeah. Erik and I both know a guy named Chad that we should probably send your way because he does not know how to podcast, and also another fellow named John, but this isn't the show for either of those conversations. Wow. And but what I realized in assembling the four of us together, no offense, Zach, but Phil, Erik, and I are going to have to come up with something South Park related the next time there's a new batch of episodes or Paramount Plus special. But Phil, it is always wonderful to chat with you. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you sometime soon.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.
Nice to meet you, Phil.
Thanks for Phil. And Erik chimes in again. Indy went full Bill and Ted's. I can't even get Bill and Ted's out of my mouth. So I think that I found the movie to be a lot of fun, and it really is the trend right now that I guess people's idea of fun is like, oh, that new thing sucks. And when I saw people, and Zach, this was before I knew that you rewatched Crystal Skull and were like, it was fun. People that were like, oh boy, you thought Crystal Skull was bad. Wait till you see this one. And I was like, all right, I don't think that's.
I was seeing articles. I think Nerdist was the one leading this charge. I was seeing articles like a week or so before the premieres, even not even the release nationwide, of Dial of Destiny negates the ending of Crystal Skull, and like that was the headline all the time. You're like, who cares? It could rewrite Crystal Skull. Maybe it time travels back to the end of Crusade and ignores that whole thing. Who cares what it did?
Don't tell the person that wrote that article to ever watch any of the Halloween movies after the first John Carpenter Halloween, because they all negate each other.
Yeah.
And, we'd be better off if none of it ever happened afterwards. And look, I think that, yes, I carefully curated the four of us to talk about this because I wanted to have the conversation about, like, I had fun with the movie. I enjoyed it. It's fine if people saw it and didn't. And of course it's flawed. Very rare is the movie where you're like, wow, that was pretty close to perfect. But I thought it was a great way to close the book on Indiana Jones. And it was a fun ride, so that's why I'm glad we were able to talk about it. But I think that we appreciate everybody in the chat who joined us. And so, Zach, if people want more surprise 80s recommendations, where can they find you and your show?
You can find me at $2latefee.com, where we're calling the month of July because we have Jill Sholin as our guest this month. Jill Sholin was in The Stepfather. She was in The Phantom of the Opera, a slew of 80s movies. She's a great guest. She walked away from the business and she tells the whole story why, but she has been in a bunch of great movies from the 80s that I guarantee most people have not heard of, one of which is called Thunder Alley. It's you can find it on YouTube for free. It's a canon rock musical about a small farm town kid who's like an amazing guitarist and joins a band. Clancy Brown is in it, of course, Mr. Krabs, and from Kurgan from Highlander, et cetera, Shawshank Redemption. Leif Garrett is in it. It's got great songs.
Wow.
Jill Sholin's in that film. I highly recommend you check out Thunder Alley. and another movie called That Was Then, This Is Now with Emilio Estevez and Craig Sheffer and Kim Delaney from the 80s. It was the sequel to The Outsiders, but it's set in like 1985 when the movie came out. Emilio Estevez wrote the script. Very highly underrated, in my opinion. $2latefee.com.
$2latefee.com, and there's always great things to find there. And Zach, we appreciate you taking the time to talk modern and old movies. And I've got to come up with an angle for us to talk Hannibal Lecter, because I'd like to talk about the 3 Hannibal Lecters. Well, actually, there's 4, because there was the Hannibal Rising movie with that actor who passed away recently.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we will definitely cover Manhunter on the show. Michael Mann movie. If no one's ever seen Manhunter, it's got an amazing soundtrack, and it's Michael Mann at his 80s Miami Vice best, in my opinion.
You've got the starting point of what I would want to talk about, which is indeed the soundtrack, because some people feel like perhaps if that movie were re-edited with a modern soundtrack, it would hold up better. But you're saying no.
So the whole point of the whole point of $2 late fee is we take a movie and we take a song from that movie. So we highlight the soundtrack as well. And then we interview someone connected to that movie. So next month in August, here's a little bit of a tease. We're doing the movie Ruskies with a young Joaquin Phoenix, aka Leaf Phoenix back in the day, and Peter Billingsley from A Christmas Story. It's the second Christmas Story reference I made in a summer movie podcast. So if you've never seen Ruskies, it's terrific.
It's funny because it is definitely one of those movies that I remember the box.
I do too. I've never seen the movie, but I remember the box for it. Yeah.
Oh, you guys got to watch it. Pure 80s.
Absolutely. Great. And Erik, it's Erik Nagel is the show, and let everybody know where else you can be found.
Before I do that, I'm just going to let everybody know that I downloaded episode 97 of $2 Late Fee as they talk about Swedish supergroup Roxette, Must Have Been Love, and Pretty Woman. As soon as I saw that, I'm like, that is something I am interested in.
And here's the thing you got to know about Roxette. They got the look anyway.
They do.
Thanks, Erik. By the way, really quickly, I didn't get a chance to say this. Great hanging out with you guys. And Phil was great too. So thank you for having me on and promoting $2 late fee and all that good stuff. But yeah, great discussion with you guys.
We do. Our movie schedules hadn't really linked up at all this summer. We kept missing each other. But I was so glad we had both seen this one in time to do this show. So
we made it happen.
I do what I can. So yes, Erik. Additionally, beyond your downloads.
Besides from that, you can find me it's eriknagel.com or it's Erik Nagel, ITSERIKNAGEL, on all the social media platforms. Our show's on iHeartRadio, so you can listen to it there through their app, but it's on demand everywhere else, Apple, Spotify, and the video versions are up on YouTube and on Twitch. We stream there, and I think we're adding a couple more platforms soon. We're working that out. For the live broadcast. It's weird. We do a live broadcast of the radio show that doesn't air till the next day, and then it's a whole weird thing. But it's everywhere that you want it to be, or maybe not want it to be.
At least you don't follow that model of you do the live stream so that you can take super chats, and then as soon as it's over, you switch it to private so no one can watch it.
Well, what you don't know is I'm already live sniping this show, and I'm doing stuff my other show over here while we're doing this show over there.
And you're joined by a puppet. You're joined by a puppet and an animated potato. You can find me, of course, here on the Bladtcast, Bladtcast, the YouTube
Don't diss
channel.
the potato. He gets surly.
The potato's been on this show, and I know he's been on your show. We talked about
big fan of the potato.
We talked about Bert Kreischer's The Machine, the potato, and I on Bladtcast 545. If anybody wants to dig that one out, so of course there's the audio version of Bladtcast can be found wherever you find your podcasts. Video versions like this, you get to see fun things like images of Poochie if you only listened. And I'm on Twitter, Instagram,
and regarding Henry.
I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Christian DMZ.
Oh yeah, we're on Threads too. Yeah, I forgot.
See, there you go.
That British nuclear war movie, Threads.
Threads. And if you enjoy lengthy, in-depth critiques, you'll find me on the latest episode of the podcast called Shitty Song of the Week, where I tackle something that Erik recently covered, and I made sure to not watch your show until after I talked about the Fall Out Boy sequel to We Didn't Start the Fire, Shitty Song of the Week is a show that is apparently usually only half an hour. We did about 92 minutes because I needed a lot of time. And the spoiler is that it's paired up against a song that Danny Aiello wrote as an answer to Papa Don't Preach. And as bad as that song is, this is so much worse. So check that out over on Shitty Song of the Week.
I'm checking that out.
Yeah,
I want to check that out too and see where we lie on our analysis of the song.
Yeah, well, I sent the link to someone who said that they didn't think it was that bad, and I'm gonna have to address that on a future episode of this podcast. But that's not what we're.
I've been getting tons of comments from our video from their fan base that don't fully understand what our critique was. They're like, "Why do you have to not like things?" It's like, because that's what a critique is. You're giving your thoughts on what's good and what's bad. Why do you
have to like everything? The first two words of it are Captain Planet, and I'm just going to leave it there and leave all of you right there. That is all the time we have for now, and we'll see you next time on the Bladtcast for episode 550. I'll be back with Will Sterling, Jeff DeRay, the whole gang. We've got a lot to catch up on, so we'll see you next time on the Bladtcast.